Lizzie sort of always asks me to do these things, and I don't really know what I'm going to talk about. And she says he's going to do something interesting. Triumph of optimism, and really, um, I kind of I sort of thought about doing something, which was sort of, I guess it was sort of prompted by a conversation that Lizzie and I had the other day, or week or year or whatever it was. Well, so let's give it a crack. And it sort of, I started thinking about the ways that we typically plan our lessons, and in particular, not so much plan an individual lesson, but more plan a sequence of lessons and the principles and the thoughts that we have behind them. I've included there the format that we use at OHC to provide a sort of a weekly plan, a global forward plan for learners' benefit. It's intended to inform learners rather than to be part of the teacher's planning. And generally speaking, what happens is you look ahead to the week coming and you start kind of organizing your thoughts. And very often, those thoughts that you're organizing are driven by the course book that you're using. And here's a unit from a course book. And course books are organized in predictable sorts of ways. You have a sort of a theme, you have a context to your unit, in this case, storytelling. And storytelling naturally leads you to a grammar point, or rather, quite possibly, one suspects,
Just a second.
writers of the course books actually think, okay, we've got to do narrative verb forms. What's our context going to be? But we're going to do narrative verb forms, and we're going to look at narratives, and this is our grammar focus. And we've got a subsidiary related grammar focus of sequencing events. And we also have a lexical focus, which is linked to our theme by and large, and often tied tightly in with the grammar point that we're doing. In this case, we have describing past experiences. So we've got some verbs to talk about things that might come up in a story, and we've got some more verbs that are about communication, so that we can explain how, who said what to whom, and what happened. We've also got some comment adverbs, some of those adverbs that go at the beginning of a sentence to comment on the sentence to make our stories more exciting. I don't know, it's all great. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not making a huge criticism of this. This is Navigate. It's a course series that I like. It's a fairly recent one. I think it's a well put together course, but it is very much this sort of thing where we have this kind of lifestyle based context setting, which is very often led by, and one suspects driven by, in fact, a grammar focus that we want to put in there. And then we have a lexical focus, we have a vocabulary focus, which is largely driven by the context. It might be, or perhaps by the grammar. In this case, the little lexical sets that we're looking at are all kind of driven by the fact that we're looking at storytelling. In a unit that's all talking about transport and making plans, the lexical set might all be forms of transport or whatever. But that's kind of how it works, which is very much a kind of synthetic grammar syllabus. It's very much viewing language as sort of grammar being the fundamental thing that happens, and then Lex is plugging into it to do some jobs. But, you know, we're all supposed to be lexical these days, aren't we? And yeah, we kind of are lexical. We do some collocations. All the course books these days, well, they'll stick some collocations in there. They'll do some fixed expressions. They'll even maybe do some semi-fixed expressions or sentence heads and frames if you're lucky. Maybe you get a bit of colligation if somebody's feeling really clever. And that tends to be what we think of when we think of lexical approaches to teaching English. We tend to think of, it's collocation. It's all collocation. It's chunks, mate. Isn't it? Well, yeah, but, Mr. Lewis, this is the one that everybody always writes in their Delta essays. Language consists of grammaticalized lexes, not lexicalized grammar. Which is to say that our other picture, this idea of language consisting of a framework of grammar, which is filled with lexical kind of placeholder things that just go in the slots, is possibly not a terrifically accurate way of looking at it. And that actually it's the way that grammar kind of seeps out of lexis that organizes language. Which is not so much dealt with. There are course books that do something maybe a little bit towards that. This is quite a common thing. This one is from the American version of Empower. It's equally true of the British version of Empower, but I don't have an online copy of that. This one is, I chose the unit for the same reason, that this is the narrative tenses unit. They've chosen the theme of relationships, and there's another bit of Lexis which talks about relationship language. But there is this sort of extra thing. There's this word power, have, which kind of takes a leap out. And it just looks at some bits of stuff using have. And they're mostly taken from contexts which relate to stuff that's gone on in the unit. But broadly, what it's asking learners to do is take a look at a word and how it works. Now, I'd suggest that this is in some ways quite a limited way of doing it. And I'm going to try and maybe suggest that there's a less limited way of doing it. But we've got a bunch of things with have in them. And things, I'm just going to call them things. I don't know what they all are. Had an accident, have lunch, have three brothers, have no idea, have brown eyes and a beard, have a bite to eat, have fun. They're sort of somewhere in a liminal place around grammar and vocabulary and something. They're what we'd probably call constructions if we're trying to feel terribly clever. This idea that there is a description of language which goes both from the sort of morphological up to the slightly more complex, to the semi-fixed, to the fixed, and would include grammatical constructions. But we're starting to look at this, and in this case, we're asking the learners to look at have being used with some different vague meanings. We've got eating and drinking and possession and experience, and then other phrases, which is doing quite a lot of heavy lifting there, I suspect. But this idea of looking at a word and how a word works is, I think, a very interesting thing to do. And whilst I'm not suggesting this is the way we should be organizing our lessons or our teaching, I think it's an interesting thing to throw into the mix, maybe, should we say, to sometimes let words drive things in a way that we maybe don't typically. And the reason I started thinking about this was I was having a conversation with Lizzie about memorable diploma lessons, and mentioned one that a trainee of mine did. This is a long time ago now. That there was a trainee of mine. Wow. Sadly, I'll have to stop that there. One of my diploma trainees, possibly, I didn't catch that bit. Anyway, one of my trainees, a diploma trainee, I may have been like 20 years ago now, did a lesson that was entirely based on the word pop. Just pop. Just an hour's lesson looking at pop. And it was a lovely lesson. It was a little, I describe it as a little Fabergé egg of a lesson. It just sort of opened up. It was beautiful. Because pop is a lovely word. It's a lovely day. Why don't we pop into town? And the barbershop. How come there are so many? I have no idea. They seem to be popping up all over these days. Well, hang on. Just need to pop in here a moment. These are nice. Why don't you pop them on? See how they feel. Okay, I'll take them. Sorry, it's asking for the pin. Just pop your card in and that's gone through. Do you need a bag? No, I can pop them in this one. You've been ages. Why don't we pop to the pub for a pint and a sandwich? Oh, I saw Tony earlier. He's finally popped the question. Oh, wow. We should pop round with a present. We could get some flowers from Carla. Hi, it's Carla about. Sorry, she just popped out for lunch. Can I help? It's okay. We can pop back later. It's a lovely little word. It does some beautiful things. There are things like she's popped the question. Yeah, this is the kind of thing you get in your idioms section of your course book. But these little, she's just popped out for lunch. I mean, that's much more useful than she's gone to lunch. In fact, I warrant that if you go into any corporate or office setting and you're trying to find somebody who's not there, you'll be told they've just popped out for something. Pop has this very light feeling to it. And it's a word that we don't really look at. And yet we could spend quite a lot of time looking at how pop is used to talk about translation from one place to another, often with little or no friction, often suggesting for a very short time or very informally. It's got lots of lovely little meanings that can be taken and can be just investigated. And investigating it with a class does, I think, 2 or 3 very interesting things. I think for one thing, it actually does something about what Michael Hoey calls lexical priming. That I think one of the things you're doing is you're focusing on a piece of word, on a piece of language, and you're looking at how it primes other bits of language, how it calls up some of the language that lives around it. We'll look at some more of that in a moment, and I'll hopefully get a bit further if I have time. You're also encouraging learners to pay attention to the minutiae of the language that they hear and see around them. That learners, for example, in my context, learning in the UK, if I've spent a lesson, an hour maybe, talking to them about pop, as they walk around London, they're going to hear that a hell of a lot. It's a word they're going to hear and it's going to go boing into their brain. They're going to notice that little bit of language. And whilst I know that's not what Schmidt was going on about when he was talking about noticing, because he was talking about something much more psychological, I think the actual concrete physical noticing, the practically going, oh, wait, look, that's that thing we were talking about earlier. That's really useful. And if you can get bits of language. Very good point. If you can get learners to just think consciously about the language that they are encountering, I think that's hugely useful. So what you can do is you can try and get hold of some of that language. I'm going to introduce you to a couple of online resources that I find very useful in this respect. One of them is a specific one. It's a website podcast called betteratenglish.com. It's an, I believe, American woman who does this little thing, and it's very nice. Amongst the things she does is she records conversations with her friends, quite lengthy, free-flowing, free-form conversations that often drift in terms of what they're talking about and what they're doing, and also includes a transcript of that conversation, which is very handy for what we're going to look at next. I'll just play a very brief section to give you an
You're
idea.
listening to Better at English.
Sorry, I have to skip ahead a bit so you can hear the...
Hello, my lovely English learners.
Just go ahead a little bit.
Of different people who have adventured all over the world, and they talk about loads of different things. Like my favorite one was with this man called Levison Wood, and he was talking about his trip to Botswana and dealing with the elephants, or learning about elephant behavior and working with a conservation team out there. And so that was really interesting.
Oh,
So
cool.
things like that I really like listening to.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think I have seen that one in either in iTunes or in the podcast app somewhere. Into the Wild sounds familiar, but I haven't actually listened to that. But
yeah, it's worth listening to. They have many different...
But they're quite natural conversations. They're not scripted. They're not even really much, they're not even very staged, because they do tend to drift quite a lot. They're quite natural conversations. And I've got one which is about whether it's possible to empathize with robots, and that's the one that you were listening to, which starts off talking about elephants. But nevertheless, one of the reasons I like this is it gives you a text, because it can be quite difficult to get hold of transcribed conversational text, genuine conversational text. And I'd also like to introduce another website, or online resource, which I like very much, which is called Concordal. If you're not familiar with it, it's really worth playing with. You can Google Concordal. When I Google, it's not the top result anymore. You have to have this weird extension at the front. It's associated with a university, I think in Bergen. But it describes itself as the not so pretty cousin of Wordle. That's not the New York Times word game, but rather the word cloud builder that was quite popular for a while. The thing about Concordal is you have a window here and you can paste text into it. And when you paste text into that word cloud, you can make a word cloud, and it's not a very good word cloud. You can get much prettier word clouds. But if you go to this one here, Concordal ordered, what you get is something like this, which is all the words minus any that have been excluded. And so things like and the are automatically excluded, but you can also exclude other things with the number of times they appear in the text. Just that. So that is in fact the most common word that appears in the text. And when you click on one of those words, you get concordance lines of where that word appears in the text. So for example, if you click on the word actually, which is quite high there somewhere, where is it? There, it's up there, 9 instances of actually. Click on the word actually, you get all the instances of actually and where it comes. Click on love and you can get all the word. Click on can't, get all the can'ts. And you can begin to look, and you can help learners to look at how is this language used. And I'm going to show you something about, well, one of my favorite words, possibly my favorite word in English, just. I love just. I believe it's the most common modalizer in spoken English. It's very commonly a hedge. It tends to mean one, or be used for one of these purposes. Mean is a very, very strong word to put on just, which when you say it is mostly just. It often means very recently. Sometimes it means right now or soon. It sometimes means exactly. Sometimes it means equally. Sometimes it means only, nothing more than. Sometimes it means almost not or barely. Sometimes it's used to add emphasis. He was just gorgeous. And sometimes it's used to mean simply less, almost not, to reduce emphasis. Yeah, I just wanted to go in. And you can take that and you can look at how these things are being used, and you can, and I'm not going to do it here because we don't have time, but you can try to match which of these uses are being used in which of these ways. And with words like this, it's very seldom absolute. It leads to, and has led in my classes to, really something of a discussion of what is just actually doing there. But mostly it's just sensitizing people to this just tiny little just sound that they just hear every day that they're walking around London. They just you just can't avoid it. It's just there, isn't it? It's just everywhere. And they just begin to start to hear it and just begin to start to be able to introduce it. And you can cover an awful lot of stuff because there's grammar in there. One of the most common uses of just is have or had with just and a past participle. Now, you can, if you like, teach present perfect, but what if you're teaching just? You're teaching just, this little just. And so you've got, I've just seen Tony. We just got home when the alarm went off. All we've got is our just going to or about to. Have you packed? I'm just going to do it now. I was just about to call you. Just as, yeah, it's just as fast as getting the tube. She's just as bright as her sister. Just with an imperative, which is one of the most common uses of it, or with could, would, you, just. So just wait here a moment. I mean, if you look at the difference between wait here a moment and just wait here a moment, that just is a wonderful thing. It takes the sting out of the imperative. Just pass me that, would you? Sorry, can you just, it's lovely. And we're getting grammar, but we're not thinking of it as a grammatical pattern. We're thinking of it as a thing that just does. We've got collocation. There's lots of collocations that are highly common with just. Just collocates very strongly with about. It's just about ready. It collocates strongly with as. Your email came just as I was leaving. I met her just before I left for college. It's a great gift for Mum's birthday or Mother's Day or just because she's Mum. There's just enough time for us to be out of danger before it blows. It's just like that time you jumped off the dock into the lake. It was just then that amazing idea popped into my mind. Let's not celebrate just yet. Look at some highly common collocations. We can have some fixed expressions. Just in time. Just in time is so fixed that it's actually become part of the sort of the business lexicon. If you teach business English, you've probably talked about JIT transaction. Just a minute, just a second, just a moment. How often do you say, just a minute, just a minute, just a sec? Just like that. She turned around and left, just like that. Without even bringing Tommy Cooper into it. I'm just looking. I mean, this is a piece of, if you're walking around Oxford Street, the phrase, I'm just looking, is bloody useful. Here's some bits of English. Where would you put just? I'm not going to ask you to do it. Don't worry. We'll only spend a few minutes. I just can't get enough. I just called to say I love you. And notice it would be quite different if I said I called just to say I love you. That would be saying something different, wouldn't it? I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more just to be the man who walked 1,000 miles to fall down it. Girls just want to have fun. I love you just the way you are. We can be heroes just for one day. And please don't take him just because you can. This is language which is lovely. It's everywhere. It's in the songs that they like. It's in the adverts that they see on telly, it's in the conversations that they hear all around them. And that leads me to another thing I kind of want to suggest and that I like doing. I very much like setting my learners what I call noticing homework. And I find that a word is a really useful piece of bait, if you want to call it that. I think of it as sort of fishing for interesting language, using high frequency words as bait. Because saying to a learner, okay, I want you to go out and I want you to try to hear that word just. We're going to listen to a whole bunch of them. I want you to try and hear it and just write it down. Just write it down when you hear it. But actually, you can do it with other stuff. You could do it with a nice common word like have. Tell learners to go out and, try to write down examples of the present perfect, and you'll have limited success, or at least in my experience, you get limited success. If you say to learners, next time you hear a sentence with the word have in it, write it down and bring it to class tomorrow. You get a whole load of interesting stuff. I've updated my CV. Can you have, I sit down and have, I've got some goals and I'm starving. I got up late and I didn't have, you could have, can you have a look at it? Have a beer. I didn't have time for breakfast. You could have called me. And suddenly, when you've got these little bits of language, whether they found them, and they can find it, it doesn't really, this is obviously this kind of sending learners out to find language is much, much easier in my teaching context, where they're surrounded by English the minute they step outside the classroom, probably more so than when they're in the classroom. But actually, if you're overseas, if you're teaching in a non-English language speaking context, the pop music they listen to, it's got all these words in it. The radio programs, the film, the adverts that are printed up there they've all got it, the t-shirts they're wearing, they've all got this stuff in it. And if every learner in your class brings a sentence with have in it, I guarantee that you will have lots of interesting stuff that you can work with, and you can look at some grammar, but you can look at grammar as a pattern that arises out of lexes, and you can look at fixed expressions, and you can look at them as things that are ways to put this word into your conversation. You can, if as our headline speaker this evening, if they manage to persuade you, Jez manages to persuade you to get your learners doing some extensive reading, they will find lots of this stuff in there. They'll find this stuff in their extensive reading, and you'll be able to just look at it. But can I suggest that just occasionally, rather than saying today we're going to do present perfect, maybe do today we're going to do anyway, or today we're going to do actually. Actually is a brilliant word. If you give learners the opportunity to use actually, it just brings their conversation alive. The difference between he's French, isn't he? No, he's Belgian. And he's French, isn't he? Actually, he's Belgian. It's not a difficult difference. It's not a huge difference. It's just a little finesse in the language that learners are producing. And so potentially again, okay, once you start listening for these things, they're absolutely bloody everywhere. But just by every now and then picking a word and focusing on it and saying today's lesson is just going to be about this interesting little word and how it works. And if you are interested in doing this, and particularly if you are less confident in your own ability to sort out the wheat from the chaff or to see everything that's going on, I'd like to commend to your attention finally a book. It's quite an old one. think it's still in print, but I may be wrong, called Natural Grammar by Scott Thornbury. In it, he takes I think, my 200, what he describes as keywords of English, and just looks at the patterns that are commonly associated with them. It's a weird kind of grammar book because it's not present perfect, past perfect, present progressive. It's have, since. And it's just looking at a word and looking at the ways that that word is commonly used. I remember seeing him speak when he published the thing. And apparently his publishers, Oxford, forced him to put a grammar index in there. So there is a grammar index that if you look up present perfect, it'll direct you to have and since and already or whatever. But it's more fun when you don't. And it's a nice little book because it will give you some of that confidence to take a word and explore it and play with it.